This video is proudly sponsored by Clip Studio Paint, an art program for mobile and PC which is great for beginners and pros alike. So now I'll be using this fantastic art program to demonstrate 15 art tips that have helped me throughout my process for years. So enough yapping, let's get straight into it. Tip number 1, priming you all with the most common tip, but for good reason. Flip your canvas. Make sure to do it the most during the sketching stage, but flipping throughout your process can be a helpful way to spot any anatomical or compositional inconsistencies in your artwork. It also helps you to step back and see the artwork as if you were a passerby viewer. Keep in mind though, not every element of your artwork has to be symmetrical. Tip number 2, lower your sketch opacity for smoother lines. The sketch of your artwork can look glorious and beautiful, and then when you do the line art, it just looks jank. Thank you, I'll be here all night, folks. Over-circulated jokes aside, here's one way to combat this. Lower the opacity of your sketch so when you draw your line art, you can pretty much see what the finished product will look like. You'll also know exactly when to Ctrl Z and try again. Tip number 3, customize your brush pressure. Every person draws with a different intensity. Some of us are super light on the pen and some are trying to push like we're back in ancient Egypt writing hieroglyphics onto hard granite. So what I suggest is opening up the pressure options for your brush and adjusting it until you get something comfortable. Tip number 4, the transparent color can be used as an eraser. Instead of using a dedicated brush as an eraser, you can alternatively set your current brush to the transparent color which will act as an eraser. This means all your eraser strokes will match those of your brush and you'll hopefully be able to have more control over what it is you're trying to get rid of. Tip number 5, balance detail. A big part of composition is to direct the viewer's eye through the image. One way to do this is to balance detail to create contrast. Typically the areas I want to draw the eye to are more detailed or surrounded by more detail. Tip number 6, use clipping layers and lock your transparent pixels. One way to control where the colour ends up on your artwork is to have a base layer and use clipping masks and lock the transparent pixels. The latter setting is also called Protect Alpha in some programs, but there are many ways to use both these settings in your process and increase the amount of control you have at every stage. For example, you can use Lock Transparent to change the colour of your sketch or colour your line art. You can also use clipping to segment the different parts of your character to colour, and Protect Alpha to stop messing with my script! Tip number 7, avoid colour picking. When colouring your artwork, I would recommend to generally avoid colour picking and instead approximate the colours yourself. This helps to build your own unique colour identity. See which colours you gravitate towards, warmer, cooler, more saturated, more muted. This will also help train your eye for making colours for things like manual shading. But please be sensible when choosing your own colours because there's a difference between a pastel colour palette and a full Sanrio job. Tip number 8, use pure white sparingly. I'm talking about our lovely friend #FFFFFF. This is the brightest colour you can possibly use in an artwork, and I used to just throw it around like crazy. Their pants are white, but now I know there are a multitude of other colours that you can use to represent white that are really close to it but not exactly it. So why do this? It's so you can save the brightest colour in your arsenal for the most eye-popping, contrasting, succulent highlights ever. Along the same deal, use pure black sparingly. Basically the same concept as white but in reverse. I'd suggest keeping this trick in mind when filling out base colours, for the main reason that you can't really add shading to a value that is already the pure darkness of the void. Instead, try using a colour that is very close to black but has the same hue as the overall mood of your artwork. Tip number 9, never use extreme colours. Unless that's your jam, of course. Extreme colours are colours like this, this, or this. See how you didn't enjoy that? It's because these fellas are eye-burningly saturated. If this is your style, by all means go for it. We love that eye burn art too, but if you're not trying to laser your audience's eyes out and you're looking for a red, blue, orange or magenta, try making the colour a little less saturated, a little darker. You might get something a little bit more pleasing on the eye. Tip number 10, check your values using a white color layer. I was yapping on about some composition stuff before, and this kind of relates back to that. Value is another feature of composition that you can use to lead the viewer's eye. Typically, areas of more contrast, either lighter or darker, attract more attention. So to make sure that your artwork doesn't have eyes darting all over the place, use a white or black layer over all your other layers and set this layer to color to reduce your artwork to purely values, so you can see where the most contrast is and adjust from there. Tip number 11, use overlay and multiply for shading and mood. I first make the subject fit the value of the background by using a lighter multiply. Then I use a darker one and remove areas which are in the light to create the shading. I add an overlay layer which eliminates midtones and creates more contrast in your colours according to a hue. If your subject was to be placed in a dimly blue lit subway, the effects layers might look like this, and a warm snow scene might look like this. Try playing around with these two layer effects to integrate the subject of your drawing into a background. Tip number 12, colour your line art. This is one that I didn't think was super necessary back when I first started drawing, but now I know it's a stage as important as line art or colouring. Colouring your line art just makes an artwork look nicer. Yes, I know that solid colour lines can look good too, but colouring your line art basically gives you another dimension of possibility when it comes to your digital art. One tip is to change your base line art colour to something which reflects the general colour or mood of your artwork, and then make some further line art colour refinements from there. Tip number 13, I wanted to know this for so long. It's probably the most gate-kept out of all of these. But to create this soft line art effect, first create a duplicate of your line art. Then using the Gaussian blur effect, blur the top line art slightly. Then set the blurred line art to a lower opacity and boom, you got that soft dreamy line art. By the way, I recommend doing this after you've finished colouring your line art. Tip number 14. Another thing you can do at the end of your artwork is use expand selection to create a lovely border. First, use selection from layer to select your subject. Then use the expand option and enter some amount of pixels. It'll depend on the canvas size you're using and the selection will expand. Then on a separate layer below your subject, fill the selection in. And then you have a cool little border around your artwork. Tip number 15. Use an art program that you enjoy. There's a bunch out there that I have and haven't tried, but for the last 3 years I've settled on Clip Studio Paint because of the sheer amount of cool features in this app. Some things I didn't mention in this video are its animation tools, materials tab, and huge user-driven assets library. There are a bunch of other programs too which all offer their own strengths. Try a bunch out and see which one gives you the tools that you need. They each differ in the biggest and smallest ways, and you won't notice these differences until you try them for yourself. So if you want to give Clip Studio Paint a spin, there is a link for the free trial in the description. So that's the end of our tips. Did I guess the one that you'd suggest? If not, write it down and put it in the comments. Anyways, thank you so much to Clip Studio Paint for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching. I'll see you again soon.